Welcome to a medieval medical student's magical necromancing astrology textbook by Paris Bermudez. In this presentation, I will be examining the manuscript MS Lat 7337 in the Paris Bibliothèque Nationale de France. My research will specifically address type of codex and brief history, authors of astrology and necromancy, MS Lat 7337 magical content, humanist script textual comparison, and continuing research. Written in Latin, this manuscript is found in the Paris Bibliothèque Nationale de France and is composed of 240 pages of paper. MS Lat 7337 was most likely made in either Paris or Bologna at the end of the 15th century. Its earliest documentation is from 1732 in the Biblioteca Colbertina collection of Frenchman Jean-Baptiste Colbert. However, its provenance before then is unknown, leaving stylistic evidence to determine its origin. Though not identified with a title page, this book is essentially a medical student's astrological textbook, with text composed and collected over time, written in at least 9 different hands. With just a few figural devices, this manuscript has little illumination, but many secrets. On the first page, an archivist from the Bibliothèque Nationale catalogued the codex in 1892, numbered the pages, and helpfully recorded a table of contents shown here. The BnF also reproduced this table online, though with many inconsistencies, it does act as a Latin transcription guide. While most of the chapters relate to medicine, it's always in the context of astrology. Though this combination sounds strange, it was extremely relevant for university students in the Middle Ages, where every student studying math, medicine, the arts, philosophy, or theology was required to study astronomy. The foundational text for astronomy was a book called De Sphera by Giovanni da Sacro Bosco, written around 1230. Initially, the Sphera was a quarto pamphlet that addressed questions relating to the sphere and astronomy. Over time, authors and professors would add their own commentary, and the book would grow to include topics of Ptolemaic two-sphere astronomy, planetary motions, calculations, geometry, horoscopes, medical astrological predictions, and even magic and necromancy. Some of these commentators would become more popular than others and would continue to be circulated and printed together with the Sphera, becoming popular in 1495, around the time MS Lat 7337 was made. Astrology became associated with magic and necromancy early on, influenced by the introduction of Muslim Spain. Because astrology involved predicting the future or manipulating human events, this was not too dissimilar to magic. The connection to necromancy involved manipulating demons for human advantage. Although the BnF categorizes this codex as a medical manuscript, about 5 of the 12 names mentioned in this manuscript are associated with either magic or necromancy, and 4 passages of about 37 pages discuss it. The most notorious necromancer and commentator of the Sphera was Francesco Stabili, known as Cecco d'Ascoli, who lived between 1257 to 1327. As professed by Lynn Thorndike in his 1949 The Sphere of Sacrobosco and its Commentators, and in his second volume of his 1970 A History of Magic and Experimental Science, Cecco is the only author in MS Lat 7337 to exclusively comment on the Sfera of Sacrobosco. Secondly, this commentary almost entirely contains astrology in relation to necromancy and even explicit details on a demon called Floron residing in the cosmos. Cecco in his writings acknowledges that necromancy is against Christianity, but doesn't see necromancy as something inherently bad, but instead a practice that can be understood and used like astronomy. Cecco does admit that dealing with demons through necromancy is no doubt dangerous, as they deceive vulnerable Christians. It was not the necromantic writings that got Cecco condemned by the Inquisition and burned as a heretic, but rather his teachings that manipulated the stars to change the course of human events, connecting Christ with astrology, his prediction of the Antichrist, and other ideas that went against the faith. It is also noted that Cecco had many enemies and could have been a target of private malintent. This excerpt, however, is not the only one to concern magic in MS Lat 7337. For example, the opening chapter is by Anthony de Monti Ulmi, entitled Things Occult and Manifest, also known as the Book of Intelligence, where he takes Cecco's writings to the next level in his practice of necromancy and invocations of spirits. Though his contributions to MS Lat 737 appear a little more medically focused, de Monteolmi was a notorious necromancer. Another magical text is the chapter that begins on page 45, identified as Natural Experiments. Thorndike explains that this passage describes practices against enemies or serpents, which were learned in Paris from Thomas di Pisano, or Thomas of Bologna, as he was also known. Thomas was the physician of the King of France, Charles V, where he made many astrological predictions and wrote about a philosopher's stone, according to his daughter and renowned poetess Christine de Pizan. His magic practices were apparently taken from the writings of an Arab philosopher called Tibet ben Korath, who is found in two passages in MS Lat 7337. Lastly, beginning on page 221, where the table of contents also mysteriously ends, a chapter labeled Institutione Secretorium by the archivist begins. Thorndike states that the passages here have been copied from a book of magic. What is significant here is that the scribal hand is much more hurried and loose. The text also begins on a completely new folio, as the one before it is blank, suggesting it was added to the codex separately and copied in a hurry. There are at least 9 different identifiable scribal hands in this manuscript. The inconsistency of the hands, the titles, initials, incipits, and explicits lead me to believe that these individual chapters were collected and recorded over time and bound together. This practice, the content, the hurried hands and lack of decoration, and use of paper suggests this collection of texts was used as a university textbook and created in part using the Peccia system. In the 13th century, the Peccia system allowed students to rent an exemplar to copy to create their own textbook. Evidence shows that just 11 cities had the Peccia system, including Bologna, Padua, France, and Paris. In the 14th and 15th centuries, however, dictation of texts by the professor to the students took precedence to the Peccia system. This occurred in Prague and Paris and was also more financially accommodating for the students. We have seen that most of the codex is written in 2 columns per page, which allowed for easier reading. There are large margins on the sides and bottom of the page in which the owner would take notes. The common script used in MS Lat 7337 is Italian humanist script. Originating in Florence in about 1403, it was widely used into the end of the 15th century and replaced by printing. This example here was written by Poggio Brattolini, who is generally accredited with inventing the script. The development of the humanist script came with a desire for a more legible, less cramped text opposed to that of the French and German Gothic script. Humanist scholars had a tendency to collect and read much earlier manuscripts that were largely written in the graceful Carolingian script, opposed to their contemporary blocky Gothic. This subsequently produced a demand for books in a script recalling Carolingian, resulting in humanist. Once the Medici family began to commission books in this new old-style script, it became popularized. When we consider these 3 scripts side by side, the transition becomes more evident. Each script can be identified by characterizing letters, which will help to categorize the script in MS Lat 7337. I have chosen to analyze and compare with the Poggio example a section from page 34 taken from Teco's chapter, as the beginning and the majority of the codex is written in this hand. The identifying letters of humanist script are the long straight S, the low hanging G, and the A that comes to a point at the top. These elements are a return of the Carolingian script. The history and culmination of MS Lat 7337 is no doubt mysterious and intriguing. Why did a medieval medical student have magical necromantic texts in their astrology textbook? My work with this manuscript is not yet done, and in the preceding paper I intend to further understand the individual authors found in the manuscript, analyze the different scribal hands, consider the codex as an object, try to theorize who the owner was, and why they might have these magical texts. Thank you.